That was pretty dramatic, but I am sick of changing tyres on a bucket. I've seen a few people's DIY tyre changing stands online and none of them are quite what I'm after, and I think I've got a better idea, so I'm going to build it. The main structure of this tyre changing stand is going to be made of this square tubing, and I've chosen two sizes that sleeve together really well with very little tolerance. This is the inner tube, which I need to drill holes in both sides so that the finished stand's height is adjustable. I'm marking out every 50mm and then marking the center of the tube using my adjustable square and scribe. Then I can center punch the locations before drilling so that my drill bit doesn't walk too much. A locking pin needs to pass through these holes, so they need to be accurate. All my normal drill bits are blunt, so I used a step bit for this with some WD-40 as lubricant. The tubing has a wall thickness of 5mm, but this cheap step drill bit had no problem getting through it. Now with both sides of the inner tube drilled, I can move on to the outer tube, which just needs a hole each side at the top for the locking pin. The outer tube also needs a hole drilled and a nut welded to the corner, which is used for a hand bolt that can be tightened to take out any slop that the two tubes have when they're sleeved together. I just need to grind a flat section on the corner of the tube to make it a bit easier to weld the nut on. I also thread a bolt into the nut before welding to protect the threads from any welding slag and to prevent the nut from warping with the heat. Whoops. I forgot to turn the gas on. This piece of plate is to cap the top of the inner tube, and I'm drilling a hole in it to weld a nut on one side to hold the threaded rod that will be used as the axle of the stand. Because my welder isn't the most powerful, I'm going to chamfer the tube and the plate to make sure I get good weld penetration. Then I'm going to grind all the welds flat so that this inner tube can sleeve all the way into the outer tube. I don't know why I didn't expect this, but there was way too much slot between the threaded rod and the nut for my liking, so I ended up just welding the threaded rod to the inner tube cap. So I had to chamfer out the hole that I drilled so that there would be space for the weld. I'm cutting a 45-degree angle on this short piece of tube because I'm going to weld it to the outside of the outer tube and use it as a place to store my tyre levers. Using a cut-off wheel on the grinder to make the cut and then a sanding disc to clean it up and chamfer the edges, I can then weld it to the outer tube using a magnetic square. These things are good, but they're also a pain at the same time. The magnet is so strong that it's really hard to make small adjustments on placement. I have these 10mm pieces of rod that I'm going to put in my drill and use the belt sander to make the end rounded. And then I'm going to use the disc sander to put two chamfers on the end. This will make sense in just a second. My friend made me two cone spacers on a lathe for this project, one for the bottom and one for the top. This will be the top cone spacer that is used to tighten down on the wheel, so I need to weld a nut on top. Then the two pieces of 10mm rod create the wings, making this sort of a big wing nut. The chamfers on the rod make it easier to weld them and also get the angle the same. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do for a base when I started this project. Initially, I was going to bolt this stand to the floor so it wouldn't take up too much floor space. Then I realized the distance the stand would need to be bolted to the floor from the wall to fit a 21-inch wheel would take up more space than if it just had a base. So using a 600mm level to help me keep everything flat and straight, I tacked some steel T-section to the bottom of the outer tube. Skip to the welds being done, and I also ground the ends of the feet round for aesthetics and so it would be less likely to scratch the floor. Speaking of aesthetics, I also finished off the stand with some black rust prevention primer. Now that the tyre changing stand is done, I can assemble it and then show you how it works. Alright, I've swapped over to GoPro to make filming this part a little bit easier. As you can see when I was assembling it, there was a spot for the bead buddy. This wasn't intentional, but it just turned out to be a good spot. We've got the valve core removal tool down here on a magnet, which is just nice to have right there. All the tyre lever storage on the side here. And if I want to adjust the height of the stand, I just loosen this little hand nut here and take this pin out. And you can see the tube raises and lowers. So I can select my height, let's say that high, put the pin back in, and you can see with these tubes sleeved together, there's a bit of play. It's not tons, but I wanted this thing to be rock solid, so that's why I added this hand nut. And now there's nothing. This thing is rock solid. And see what those cone spacers do is it actually centers itself in the wheel bearing of the wheel. So the wheel can still turn, but it's actually really solid on the stand and it's not going to wobble around and tilt. Because I'm running tubeless, I've got 2 valves here. And I can also use that magnet to hold the actual valve cores. And then I'll pop that valve core removal tool back while I'm not using it. I'll grab a tie lever so I can break this bead. I need a 15mm socket to get my rim lock off, but I also might add a 15mm spanner to that magnet down there so it's always with the stand as well. Again, I'll store that nut on the magnet for now. I'm going to flip the wheel over. Now I'm actually not changing tyre in this instance, I'm just going to flip it around to get a bit more life out of it. This is just soapy water. The soapy water just helps everything slip into place and bead correctly so it can also seal. I might make this bit of threaded rod a little bit shorter just so I don't have to wind it off so far. I don't usually run it at 12 psi, I run it more like 6, but I'll use the 12 psi to check for leaks, make sure this all sealed correctly. And the benefit of that soapy water that I use to get the tyre on is that I can also use it now to see if I get a bunch of bubbles. All these little bubbles are just from the installation, but I can go around now and check to see if I get any more, and that'll tell me if I've got a leak. So that's pretty much it. I think that was the easiest tyre change I've ever done. My back hurts a lot less from leaning over a bucket. If there's anything you guys would have done differently, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your ideas for your own tyre changing stands. Maybe if you're also doing it on a bucket, this has inspired you to make one for yourself. If you made it this far in the video, I assume you liked it, so please hit the like button, consider subscribing, and otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. 4th wall break ready? It's already built.